All right, let's start off with our first big story. We're joined by an oil and gas expert and energy lawyer, Emeka Akabogu. Emeka, good morning.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Good morning. All right, now let's give a background to the story before we start the discussion proper. The Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Limited, NLNG, was set up by the Nigerian government to eliminate gas flaring and derive value from the country's 187 trillion cubic feet gas reserves.
Now, backed by the NLNG Act, the Nigerian Liquefied Natural Gas Limited was incorporated as a limited liability company in May 1989. The major aim of the company is to harness Nigeria's vast natural gas resources and produce liquefied natural gas and natural gas liquids for export. It is currently the fourth largest supplier of liquefied natural gas in the world.
Four major shareholders own the company. The federal government of Nigeria, represented by Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation (NNPC), has a 49% share in the NLNG. Shell Gas (BV) has 25.6%. Total LNG Nigeria Limited has 15%, and NN International has 10.4%. The Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas Limited has generated more than $900 billion in revenues. The company also supplies about 40% of the annual domestic cooking gas consumption.
Now, the joint venture company, which started with an initial investment of about $6 billion, has generated more than $90 billion in revenues and currently has an asset base of about $11 billion. It also has two subsidiaries, Boni Gas Transport Limited and NLNG Ship Management Limited. Now, NLNG has converted about 119 billion standard cubic meters of associated gas to export as liquefied natural gas and natural gas liquids.
And this has reduced Nigeria's gas flaring profile from about 65% in 1999 to less than 25% today. That's quite an achievement. All right, so let's go to our guest now. Emeka, what do you make of this? The company seem to be doing fine. Why amend the act?
Well, I believe that it's right for the act to be amended, actually, because the essence of the amendments is not to stop the operations of the company. Rather, it is to ensure that the Nigerian government and the Nigerian people get more value from the operations of NLNG than they currently get. Primarily, the core issues relating to the amendments are founded in the fiscal incentives and guarantees, which are inherent in the acts, which was required at the time the company started operations. Those incentives were for the purpose of ensuring that the company is able to take off without the burden of taxes, under the pioneer status rule. But this was more than 18 years ago. The company started operations in 1999. And if you look at by the tenor of the acts, which is sought to be amended, the tax incentive and the tax holiday which was granted to the company was for a total period of 10 years. Now, this in itself is unprecedented. Till date, no other company in Nigeria has ever enjoyed a 10-year tax holiday. Under the legislation which facilitates pioneer status for companies in Nigeria, the maximum possible period of a tax holiday should be 5 years. Indeed, 3 years, which may be renewable by the president by another 1 year, and then if there are strong circumstances, possibly for another 1 year. So for a maximum of 5 years. But we have a situation here where the Nigeria LNG was granted an unprecedented 10-year tax holiday. And beyond the 10-year tax holiday, we have a situation where in the interpretation of that act, the company is deeming it to be entitled to many other tax holidays which are even beyond those expressly stated in the Act. So that's one of the fundamental reasons why the amendment has been deemed necessary.
Okay, we'll come back to this to look more into this. Let's go on a break, and then we come back. Stay with us on the TVC Breakfast. We're just scratching the surface yet. We'll get into the main discussion as we get along. Right, if you're just joining us, you're watching TVC Breakfast. We are looking at the proposed amendment of the NLNG Act. The National Assembly has made the move, but there are lots of opposition. Stakeholders, Pengas and unions have come to say, no, we don't want this amended. But we have an oil and gas expert, Emeka Kabogu, with us in the studio. He is giving us a light into the reasons why these moves are on, as the case may be. In fact, he, from his own perspective, his own opinion, wants the act to be amended. Now, let's get into this. This case of amendment has been taken to the court and has gone through all the court process, even to the Supreme Court, and it was upheld that the act should not be amended. So, in all of this, why is there still not any satisfaction when you've gone through all the legal processes?
No, it's not correct that the court has said that the NLNG Act should not be amended.
Okay, give us light into it.
I want to believe that there have been a couple of court actions which have been filed by one or two organizations which believe that, for instance, the NDDC, which believe that NLNG should pay taxes which have been set out in the NDDC Act. And in some of those cases, the courts have come to uphold some of the provisions in the current NLNG Fiscal Incentives Act and uphold it to the tenor that the taxes which are being sought by NDDC, for instance, are not liable to be paid by virtue of the tax holiday which is granted under the Incentives Act. So the core of the issue is the Nigeria Liquefied Natural Gas Limited would want to ensure that the tenor of that act and the interpretation which is given to the act continues in perpetuity. While many organizations, particularly government organizations, which will ordinarily want to tax NLNG, would not want that act to continue. So the question is, what is the overall overriding interest of Nigeria in the face of these circumstances?
And before we go to the general summation of it, let's pick one or 2 points. The NDDC, stick with NDDC. They're meant to remit some particular amount to NDDC. That's what NDDC Act says. So between the NDDC Act and the NLNG Acts, which one supersedes each other, or which one overrides the other? Because I guess that's some kind of contention there between the NDDC Act and the NLNG Act.
Yeah, you see, that's a point of controversy. I mean, in law, typically in some situations where there are two acts which are on the same level or footing, at times it is taken that the one which is later in time is taken to supersede the one which is prior to that one, because it's assumed that the National Assembly, at the point in time it was making the latter act, must have construed and taken in the implications of the earlier acts. So, but it's a thorny issue, and even the judgments which have come out of the courts have not been absolute, and have still left room for other interpretations. And you must know that this is not limited to NDDC. Even NIMASA, for instance, has such issues against Nigeria LNG, and indeed a couple of other government agencies which statutorily, by virtue of the acts which set them up and which mandate them, require that a couple of levies or taxes be placed at the doorstep of NLNG. So ultimately, the question is, are these levies valid in law? Are they levies which are meant to improve the operations of these organizations and the larger economy? And has the tax holiday of the Nigeria LNG indeed abated, or does it exist in perpetuity? NLNG will want us to believe that it exists in perpetuity. And one of the...
Well, what does the law say that? I think that's the question.
Precisely, and I'll come to that. Because I think the reason that the amendment has been sought at this time is because the interpretation of the act as it is has, over the years, failed to protect the other parties. So one of the provisions I would like to note from the NLNG Act,
yes,
actually, is a provision which relates to the period of the tax holiday. And the period of the tax holiday actually indicates, if I may, we just read.
Yeah. What section is that?
That's section 2 of the Nigeria LNG Fiscal Incentives, Guarantees and Assurances Act. It says that notwithstanding the provisions of section 10 of the Industrial Development Income Tax Relief Act, the tax relief period of the company shall commence on the production day of the company and shall continue for a period of 10 years. So, however, that the tax relief period shall terminate at the first anniversary date after the first 5 years, when the cumulative average sales price of liquefied natural gas reaches $3 as calculated in the first schedule of this act, in accordance with which such calculation shall only be made annually at each anniversary date. Now, the implication of this is actually that even though the act gave NLNG a 10-year tax holiday, it was subject to a proviso that if a certain threshold is reached within the first 5 years, that tax should abate, that holiday should abate. And the information which we have is that indeed, not only was that threshold attained, but it was surpassed by 200% within the first 5 years. So, the tax holiday granted to NLNG should have abated after the first 5 years. Now, it did not abate. Rather, it continued for 10 years before the company started paying company income tax.
Okay.
However, the company has argued that it is not subject to several other very important levies and taxes, and that it's not subject to these taxes in perpetuity. And that's the crux of the matter.
All right. Now, in light of this, there are unions, there are stakeholders who are saying, in fact, Pengasan, the Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria, have come vehemently to say the act should not be amended and all of that. These are all stakeholders, apart from the companies who are investors, co-owners of NLNG. They have this understanding. They have an idea of what the act says. So why would they kick against the amendment of the act?
Well, with very due respect to Pengasan, you know, he who pays the piper dictates the tune.
Okay.
NLNG is made up of four contracting parties. 3 of them are private sector held, Shell, Total, and Eni. They hold the majority shares, actually, 51%.
Put together, the three of them put together.
Put together, the private sector stakeholders own majority shares in the company. The members of Pengasan are staff of these companies. NLNG is a very successful company. NLNG is the most successful company in Nigeria by value. NLNG is very powerful. NLNG has the means. It is only natural that where NLNG's interests has been affected as it is by this proposed amendment, it will go all out. And who better to vent its position than its staff?
One of the points they have is that this will halt the 20 billion plan train 7 project that is ongoing, and that may lead to about 18,000 job losses in the sector. Is that real?
It's not real. It's not real. It's simply an argument which has been developed a cosmetic argument, really, which has been developed for the purpose of truncating this amendment. Now, let me tell you, as I said earlier, the essence of the tax incentive. Now let me get me very clear. Tax incentives are good. Pioneer status to organizations and companies is very important, and that's why there is an act of the National Assembly which controls the grant of pioneer status. Okay? So in the wisdom of the legislature and the government over the years, that act was passed. So tax incentives are good. Now, the essence of the tax incentive is to give a soft landing to a company which is coming into an area which is virgin.
Okay, Emeka, when we come back, we'll take that and juxtapose that with the current situation that we have in Nigeria. If those people can do well, stay paying these taxes, and they can absorb this number of staff that they have, but that will be after this break, because we are going out now on
Yeah, we're
TVC.
going out on TVC Entertainment. Viewers there can continue with the program on DSTV channel 418 and Concert channel 190.
And of course, GoTV, it is 45, ACTV 510. Let's continue the conversation there. Stay with us.
Right, if you're just joining us, you're watching TVC Breakfast. We're discussing the proposed amendment or the move by the National Assembly to amend the NLNG Act in Nigeria. And it is facing some opposition or stiff opposition from some stakeholders, especially unions within the oil and gas sector. We have with us an oil and gas expert, Emeka Kabogu. We have been discussing this all the while. Now, before we went on break, Busalami was asking me a question. Yeah.
Okay, yes. So if you ask them to pay this levy, if you subject them to pay this levy, you know that in terms of growth and contraction, private sectors, they aren't faring well. Do you think they can survive under this condition as well?
Yeah, I think they certainly will survive. There'll be no difference, actually. If anything, given the...
There'll be no difference, actually? Really?
Yeah, given the level that NLNG has attained, it is on a cruising level. The company is very profitable. The risks which were presumed at the time the tax holiday was granted have been worked through the years, and the markets globally has been stable for liquefied natural gas. Now, let me make a point relating to the tax holiday and the essence of it. Now, the essence of tax holidays, as I said, is to remove the initial risk and burden. It will survive. There'll be no difference, actually. If anything, given the...
There'll be no difference, actually? Really?
Yeah, given the level that NLNG has attained, it is on a cruising level. The company is very profitable. The risks which were presumed at the time the tax holiday was granted have been worked through the years, and the markets globally has been stable for liquefied natural gas. Now, let me make a point relating to the tax holiday and the essence of it. Now, the essence of tax holidays, as I said, is to remove the initial risk and burden at the initial level. At the NLNG's base project, for which it needed that tax holiday, was its train 1 and 2, its base projects. That base project cost $3.6 billion. That was a significant investment at the time, and it's only natural that the government of the day had to grant them that tax holiday, $3.6 billion. Within the NLNG's first 5 years of operation, it had doubled in profits that investment of $3.6 billion. In the last 10 years, NLNG has made profits of more than $35 billion. NLNG, on the average, makes about $4 to $6 billion per year as profits.
As profits?
As profits. So the point I'm making is that the business case of this company has been tested and is known to be successful. The further trains which they need to invest in are trains to even improve on the existing success.
But is that not what Pengas is saying, that the Train 7 project, which they intend to invest, to invest $20 billion will be affected now if you ask them to start paying all these levies and people will lose their jobs?
The point is that they've got trains 1 to 6, which are already operational.
So they don't need Train 7?
They do need Train 7, but then the Train 7 is coming as an addition to the existing trains. Train 7 is not coming as a new project which is wary of the market risks which exists. That's why I say this market has already been tested. But the more important issue which I think we should concern ourselves with is an issue which relates to patriotism. We have a situation where the incentives which are being enjoyed by the company have been enjoyed for beyond the maximum period which is allowable, where important funds which need to go into very important sectors of the economy are being restrained because the company wants to continue enjoying the type of incentives which it has under its agreement.
All right, make us understand, for the sake of our viewers, we're talking about trains 1, 2, 3, or trains 7. What are all these trains? What are they about?
Essentially, they're production plants.
Okay.
They're essentially production plants which increase the capacity for the organization to have more outputs. So you have the Train 1, Train 2, which was essentially to test out the scheme and was successful. So additional trains simply ensure that more production is possible. Expansion.
Yeah, okay.
That's essentially what it is.
And more people are employed.
Yes.
Okay.
Let me give you one very important...
Emeka, don't worry, we'll come back to that. We need to churn out this information and we'll bring you in as it's required. Okay, so currently a bill to amend the NLNG Act is currently before Nigeria's National Assembly. You're aware, that's what we've been discussing anyway. The NLNG Act is a contract between the federal government and the NLNG shareholders, and it includes incentives, concessions, guarantees, and assurances.
Now, the main thrust of the guarantees and assurances is to assure foreign investors that their investments will be protected by the non-amendment of the NLNG Act. Let's take a quick look at proposed amendments to the NLNG Act. Now, striking out government's undertaking to honor stakeholders or shareholders' agreements and contracts. Striking out assurances by government to retain agreed fiscal and security regimes of the investment. The need to make NLNG contribute 3% of its annual budget to the Niger Delta Development Commission, NDDC. Only upstream oil firms pay this levy currently.
According to Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association of Nigeria and Pengasin, the proposed amendment can directly affect $25 billion worth of foreign investment, as well as another 18,000 jobs Nigerian linked to the company's expansion programs. And Emeka says, no, that's not even real. The union said the federal government risked a possible loss of $124 million per annum, which is paid as dividend and related taxes if the proposed amendment of the NLNG Act sail through.
Experts say the altercations to the NLNG Act will lead to a breach of contract with investors and may lead to the country being dragged to the International Center for Settlement of Investment and investment disputes, tribunals as a result of breaking international treaties.
Okay, Emeka, do you see the point here? That if this happens, then you'll have broken some agreement with these private sectors? Is that what will play out?
No. As I said, that is an interpretation being given by a vested interest.
All right, but what could likely happen if the National Assembly goes ahead with the amendment?
If the National Assembly goes ahead with the amendment, it is in compliance with Nigerian laws. If the National Assembly does not go ahead with the amendment, Nigeria's sovereignty is being impugned. Why do I say that? Essentially, what NLNG is suggesting, which you've just read out, is that the acts which they have, which I must say, by the way, was an act which came into place, was a military decree. It was not I assure you that in a democratically elected government, given the scrutiny that the National Assembly gives various bills, that act would probably not have passed. Now, it was a military decree. What that act is saying is that the National Assembly of Nigeria can never alter the act. That's what it's saying. It's tying the hands of the National Assembly of Nigeria ever to alter the act. I think that is very, very derogatory from the powers, not just of the National Assembly, but from the sovereignty of Nigeria.
So this is even larger than the incentives, the act itself. There's a problem with it from what you're just saying now.
Absolutely, absolutely. The act says that the National Assembly cannot amend it. So the National Assembly has inherent powers to undertake any actions relating to its legislative instruments, which it deems fit for the purpose of ensuring that national interests are protected. One important national interest, which I want to point out to you,
yes,
is one of the provisions which are in the NLNG Act. It's just an example.
Yes.
And that's on withholding tax. See what it says. It says that in respect, this is section 6 of the Act, section 6 sub 5, in respect of any work or services provided from outside Nigeria to the company by any person other than a Nigerian company or citizen, that person shall be exempt from tax on income or profits arising from the provision of that work or those services. The implication of this is that if a foreigner provides services to NLNG, any services whatsoever,
taxes,
it shall not be taxed.
Whoa.
So there are fundamental issues with this act. Let me tell you on something else. NLNG today has probably the largest fleet by tonnage of ships in Nigeria. Indeed, it has the largest fleet by tonnage of ships in Nigeria. NLNG ships, not one of them. In fact, the Bonny Gas Company, Bonny Gas Transport Company, is not registered in Nigeria, it's registered in Bermuda. Not one of its ships is flagged in Nigeria. So what are the collateral benefits which Nigeria gets from the operation of this company? So for me, the more important issue is an issue which relates to national interest and patriotism.
All right, but do you think there is anything wrong with the procedure? If there's going to be procedure for amendment, is there a way of getting partners of the NLNG to come to a table for them to have a negotiation before the amendment is carried out?
That will be useful, and I believe that has been explored.
Okay.
But don't forget that the partners we're talking about here are the partners who want the status quo to remain. So if...
so they might not be agreeable, really.
Absolutely, absolutely. There are court actions where NLNG has refused flatly to pay levies to government organizations. And it believes that these levies do not apply to it. So ultimately, the issue, which is a valid issue that Nigerians must address, is one company, one private, this is a private company, if I may say. It's not a public. NLNG does not have its shares listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange. The shares
hold
of
the whole country to ransom, as
absolutely.
As it were.
One of its shareholders, in fact, the smallest shareholder in NLNG, which is Eni of Italy, is owned partly by the Italian government, partly by the Italian people, with the shares listed on the Italian stock exchange and other stock exchanges globally. NLNG's shares are not listed on the Nigerian Stock Exchange or any stock exchange whatsoever. So this is a private company.
But until the fundamental issues are resolved, it might be difficult to really amend the act going by what you just said. That the decree says the National Assembly can't even amend it. So that should be really the bone of contention here. If that is resolved, then the National Assembly can go ahead and take care of the superficials.
Yes, now another provision in the act, in the same act, says that these provisions are valid to the extent that they are not illegal or they do not contravene public policy.
Okay.
Come on. Public policy is an issue when you say that the National Assembly is entitled from acting on its own legislation.
Okay. All right. We'll come back to this. Let's go on a break again, and we come back to dwell on the topic. Stay with us on TVC Breakfast.
Glad to have you back. It is still TVC Breakfast, and we are looking at the proposed amendment to the NLNG's Act. And with us in the studio is a lawyer, Emeka Akabogu. All right, so back to the issue at hand, really, that this a private company cannot hold the whole country to ransom, really. So what do we do to change the trend?
We need to amend the Act. The National Assembly has the power to amend the Act. The Act is not a constitutional provision. It is an Act. The National Assembly can amend any Act at any point in time. Now, let me give you an indication of what Nigeria has lost by the continued existence of these tax incentives. A report by a group called SOMO, which is an international group, indicated that Nigeria lost about $4 billion, $3.3 billion actually, between 2005 and 2013 to the tax holiday granted to NLNG alone. $3.3 billion. And that was a conservative estimate given the broader framework. That estimate did not take into account, it took account solely the company income taxes. It didn't take into account all the other levies and taxes payable to various organizations of government. It's also important to note that the individual stakeholders, if you break it down on a year-by-year basis, you see that a company like Shell, for instance, alone, its interest is about $1.7 billion out of that amount. So it did not pay $1.7 billion contribution to government. So individual...
Due to the holiday.
Precisely. So you can see individual interest of the individual shareholders which are locked into this broader
billions,
interest.
is it naira or dollars?
$1 billion.
Dollars. Okay, so we get that. We get that. I understand what you're trying to say now. You know that 2017 budget is floated already. It's in the works, and we have to borrow a lot of money. So imagine that tax coming into the country. Do we not have to borrow anymore?
Absolutely.
Do we?
Absolutely, you're right on top of it. You know what? At the current exchange rate of 500 naira, you're talking of about almost 2 trillion naira. So the point ultimately is, 2 points actually. The first is it morally right for a tax holiday to be granted to a profitable company for life? That's the first. The second is it in line with public policy for an act to tie the hands not just of the National Assembly, but of the executive in the face of any range of circumstances? That is what this act purports to do.
All right, from 1999, the 10 years from 1999 should have been 2009.
Yes.
So if at that time the tax holiday should originally have expired since 2009.
Yes.
And we wonder why the National Assembly didn't look at the need to make the amendments after that time, from 2010, 2011, and up till now. So why now?
Well, happily they've woken up.
Okay.
I mean,
they were sleeping
better late than ever.
It's always better. Happily they've woken up. You know, it is said that in my language you say that it is when a man wakes up, that's his morning. So the point is they've woken up and they're doing it now. If for any range of reasons they didn't deem it important enough previously, and of course, as I keep repeating, NLNG is a very strong, a very powerful company with wide reach across the country. But if they've woken up and are able to do it now, I think they actually should be commended for this effort. Ultimately, everybody wants NLNG to remain profitable.
And the people at the Niger Delta, another angle to it, the people at the Niger Delta, they need to know this, that this company thrives in their land and they are not remitting what they're supposed to remit to the NDDC. Then you turn around and blame the government for lack of development in that region of the country.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if you put together the taxes which are payable to NDDC, NIMASA, even the Nigerian Ports Authority, on a year-to-year basis, you are talking of nothing less than $500 million. Now, one of the indications you'll find reading through this act, reading through the lines, you'll see that important obligations which the company ought to undertake have been very, very intelligently passed on to the Nigerian Ports Authority. Obligations which Nigerian Ports Authority ought to be paid for are not being paid for, simply because it is imputed in this act. So this act, I must say, is a very sophisticated piece of legislation based on a framework agreement. This act essentially imported the obligations under a framework agreement between the NLNG's parties and the federal government of Nigeria, which at the time was hamstrung by a lot of investment challenges. But the time for which those incentives were meant to last have long passed.
Okay, now in your, because you are in support of this amendment, would you look forward to, or would you recommend that at the course of the amendment, it should also be amended in such a way that NLNG is listed on the stock exchange where Nigerians can become part of it?
Absolutely.
In the ownership.
Absolutely. I've always advocated that you give Nigerians opportunity to participate. Nigerians want to participate, particularly in a company that is as successful as NLNG. If you recall, that is one of the conditions even given to MTN some time ago. A successful company which derives its success from the generality of the Nigerian citizenry should be able to should list compulsorily on the stock exchange. Let people who are interested partake in that wealth. It is commonwealth. It is not exclusive to any category of people. And there should be, and it should not only list, there should be a minimum value of shares which need to be listed. So all these essentially are additional outlets for the economy to grow. Because as we have already seen, a significant percentage of the profits which we're talking about are shipped abroad. They're not only shipped abroad, they're shipped abroad in many cases without interest. You need to take a look at this act to see how, to see the kind of slavery, if I may put it at that, which it subjects the Nigerian government to. The act subjects the Nigerian government and Nigerian people to perpetual slavery. It must be amended. If it's not amended, it is not in the interest of Nigeria.
Okay, Ben Gassi kept saying that this will also affect, if the act is amended, it's going to affect gas flaring. In what way, if you catch their drift?
As I said, it is a romantic argument which is put together.
Okay.
There are obligations related to gas flaring within the law, which NLNG must comply with, and which IOCs, which are involved in extraction of crude oil, must comply with. And indeed, it is as a result of suboptimal implementation of laws. That is why you find that they keep flaring gas without abiding by existing obligations. There are technologies which are available to ensure that the gas which is being flared is converted to commercial value. But there is obviously much more profit in taking out just the crude and not investing in the conversion schemes. So there are laws, so that's actually a separate issue altogether. But the point is, gas flaring need not continue simply because NLNG's act was amended. It's up to NLNG needs to meet its obligations, and it has nothing to do with flaring of gas. No. The major point which they're given is that the new trains which are proposed could be affected. And my suggestion, my simple suggestion is very clear related to that. You can devise a very, very clear and defined incentive specifically for the new trains, but which do not affect the existing trains and the profitability of the existing trains. The new trains, it's a very delicate and very sophisticated application of financial engineering. Limit any incentives you want to grant to the new trains, but do not impact any incentives to the existing any incentives which have abated. Let those not be impacted, and that can work out.
Yes.
Precisely. So these are things which, if they come to the table and talk intelligently with patriotic interests on the Nigerian side, they can work out. Because ultimately, the Nigerian government has an interest in NLNG. Of course, that's also one of the issues which the public needs to actually take a bit more interest in. The dividends which accrue to Nigeria from NLNG operations, where does it go? Over the years, it's been very unclear where the dividends go. Even the NATI, the Extractive Industries and Transparency Initiative, has raised major concerns relating to the ultimate destination of the NLNG dividends over the last 10 years. I told you that NLNG has earned in excess of $33 billion in the last, since 2005 till date. About slightly less than half of that should have accrued as dividends to Nigeria. The books are not clear as to where those dividends have gone. So this is part of the wide picture which relates to the activities of this company, which Nigerians need to know and need to be mindful of when these romantic arguments are being put forward.
So what scenarios do you see playing out in the coming weeks and days as the National Assembly may go ahead, but there are agitations from unions and all of that? What scenarios can play out?
I think from a problem-solving point of view, the National Assembly and indeed the presidency should bring parties together on the table to put the national interest first, and then also consider the private company's interest. If there are concessions which will not affect the national interest, I think they could be granted. And I think there are concessions which can be given which will not impact in any way on the amendment which is proposed.
All right, there's a lone argument before we wrap up the session that even the federal government share be sold. Do you buy into that?
If the federal government share is sold to Nigerians, that will be very, very useful. Because as I said, the destination of the federal government dividends over the years is unclear.
And Nigerians are the ultimate people who should benefit.
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll allow Emeka to talk more on that when we'll come back from this short break. Stay with us.